Everyone. Unblocked is a bi-monthly event series where guests are asked questions in an AMA-style format, focusing on questions relevant to early-stage startups and blockchain technology. Unblocked is sponsored by DLab, a startup accelerator and venture studio that sits within the SOSV family. You can find out more at www.dlab.vc. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Bit frickin' coin.
Here we go. Yeah.
Bitcoin won the US presidency.
Yeah,
I'm
I would
thrilled.
agree.
I'm
Yeah.
thrilled.
Hopefully people
15,000.
didn't too many people in Pennsylvania didn't write Satoshi as the president. But
This is
in New York, hopefully there was a lot.
but look, like this is monumental. We have been on an uptrend for a while. We've spent the last 30, 40 days now above 10K. Very long, sustained, hold. I'm excited. Like we
Yeah.
are manifesting right now this reality we've been talking about for ages and ages. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm excited as well. And so, I mean,
Wait,
you
I
said,
can't feel your energy. I need like an arm motion, something.
let's
Give me
go. Here we
yes.
go. Yeah. No, I'm really excited to have you on because you sit on the side of the business that not where I used to be, but in the more traditional space, and
Yeah.
you get a more of a front row seat into what's going on in that place. And I know that you speak a lot about sort of zero interest rate policy and CBDCs. Um, Zero interest rate policy is something that's fascinating to me because it strikes me as pointless. Um,
Just wait
Given
until
the
we get to NRP. We can talk about Mervyn Goodfriend and his sort of thesis on NRP or negative rate policy as well.
Yeah. So
Gets
what
weirder.
like how do you think that relates to sort of crypto? I mean, I think it's sort of pouring in the traditional sense. I think it's pouring sort of gasoline on top of a burning house. But how does that relate to crypto?
Well, first of all, I want to start with I think whenever we talk about this topic, right? So
Mhm.
I studied economics and math in university, which is called econometrics, which is basically a little bit like statistics, where you learn how to make data say things you would like it to say.
Yeah.
So but I always remember, there's great quote. I think it's attributed to Hayek that says the purpose of economics is to teach men how little they understand about something they purport to know. Something to this effect, where basically like econ makes us all look like idiots because it's we're kind of trying to understand this really interesting dynamic, and obviously everyone's done econ 101, supply and demand intersect, that's price, but then there's all these really complicated dynamics, taxes, interest rates, behavioral economics. Now we're looking at information theory, which just happened with data and information markets in the presidential election. I think it's a really fascinating topic. But like we have all of these tropes and beliefs that we've always had in the field of economics, right? Around interest rates, around interest rate policy and monetary expansion, deficits. And we're now kind of in this era of economics where economics has become like voodoo science, right? Like
Mhm.
MMT to me feels
Yeah.
like voodoo science. No disrespect to Stephanie Kelton or proponents of MMT or modern monetary theory, which is a really fascinating idea that like deficits and debt don't matter because you can just print infinite money. But we are in this really interesting new era where like we are rewriting the book, right? And so it's kind of, we're all nerds here. I think you're a nerd. Everyone at SOSV that I've met is dorky. So I'll just lean into that. Like if we think about physics, right? Like man's understanding of the universe has evolved a lot. Since we first started on that quest, thousands of years ago. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot that we don't understand and that we can't explain
Yeah.
still. Right. And I feel
Absolutely.
like with economics and money, right, we're now getting to this point where like we are really starting to push boundaries, but also we're in the midst of like this collective shift in our belief about what is and isn't possible, because things that we long thought were impossible are happening.
Mhm.
And the cause and effect relationship that we have long hypothesized would be there has not materialized, at least not in the way we imagined, right? And so, what I think is really interesting, I'm going to get a little metaphysical here. Like, people always talk about the hard sciences, right? And like, for me, it was interesting because I was part like STEM and then part humanities because econ's kind of like witchcraft in a
Yeah.
way. Let's like throw some bones and like divine what will happen. But
Yeah.
you really have no way of knowing because these systems are really complex and really dynamic. Um, what I think is so fun is like in this era where we have an unprecedented amount of scientific discovery and we're learning all sorts of new things. But when it comes to our knowledge of money and how systems of money function and how money impacts and shapes society, right? And it's not isolated, right? Like a lot of people, I think, view investing in Bitcoin in sort of a bubble, but nothing exists in a bubble, right? So I think we're in this really interesting era of discovery across so many different frontiers, whether it's science, whether it's like a new social frontier, cultural frontier, all of these things are shifting. And in the midst of that, we are embarking on the most incredible experiment, which is the separation of state and money. Like mind blown.
Yeah.
It's
No,
so
I
exciting.
I think it's super fascinating, and I think it also just juxtapose like how sort of because in my view and looking back when I went to school and I studied economics, they made these what now seems absurd, like they in a lot of traditional economics lives in this world where it's like there's an equilibrium and people always behave and rationally and all these things. And once I got into the real life, I'm like, wait a second, none of those things are true. These are total, like, in a per vacuum, don't exist. So I think it's interesting because sort of crypto and the blockchain space, I think, skews more towards people are rational. We don't live in an equilibrium, and they're trying things. Whereas people in the traditional space, like at the Federal Reserve and those who set economic policy, are like, well, for example, if we make interest rates negative, in theory, that should make people more spend more because their savings aren't earning any money, which should help the economy. But at least the data from Europe and Japan suggests that that's not the case, which is not something that the models suggested was the case. But yet they still
But a
continue to
model
do it,
is
which is
just
amazing.
that, right?
Yeah.
It's just a model. Yeah, so I think it's like we're in this really interesting time. What the other thing that I think is really interesting, and again, I don't know if people who are watching this can like comment or share, but
They
you
can. They
know,
can ask questions. Yeah.
okay, cool. Yeah, so
Yeah.
like go off, people. Like let's talk about
Yeah.
things that are interesting. So what I think is really cool though about what's happening in the crypto space, and again, this is not isolated to crypto, right? Like SOSV covers so much more than just
Mhm.
cryptocurrencies, right? You're investing in innovation, whether that's innovation like how atoms function, right? Like hard sciences, or whether that's innovation in some of the more, I think, like esoteric aspects of how society functions and how markets function, how people function. Okay, I'm gonna get into something really weird, which I think is really interesting.
Mhm.
I think just read this book. It's been influencing my thinking a lot. It's a great book by a gentleman, Albert Kessler, I want to say. It's called The Sleepwalkers. I
Mhm.
really only the first 200 pages matter. You can find it as a PDF online. It's impossible to buy because it's out of print.
Mhm.
But it's a book that was written in the 1950s. And basically, what it is, it's this scientist slash philosopher researcher who wrote this anthology of the history of man's search for meaning in the universe. And it sort of starts off with like prehistory, right? Then it gets into Roman history, right? And the Romans really, like, we used to believe that the sun revolved around the earth. Right. But even back then, there were people who did not believe that. And if we look at the like the cult of Pythagoras and the impact that Pythagoras had on society, right? Pythagoras and sort of his disciples believed that there were sort of two components to belief. There was to understanding the universe. There was science, right? It's like the observable phenomenon, facts, how things function, and then there was the spiritual, right, which was all about nature and harmony and beauty, and they had a profound respect for the balance of those two. And then Plato and Aristotle came along. And basically, I think Aristotle in particular and Plato as well with the Republic, which like I don't understand why people find that inspirational because it's basically like a book about tyrannical dictatorship, which is really messed up. Um, After Plato and Aristotle, right, we went into 2,000 years of basically backwards progress, where all of the progress that was made in understanding man's relationship with the science and like the universe and this harmony was sort of thrown out of the window, was rejected in favor of belief in religion, where we use allegories and stories as social programming to preserve a certain order that prioritizes a specific power structure and keeping that power structure intact. And like we have just in the last like 200 years started to come out of that, and now we see the emergence of new science as well as new philosophy and like new sort of metaphysical understanding that is challenging that power structure again. Um, Except this time we have something we didn't have last time. We have this amazing thing called the internet, right? We
Yeah.
have like all of these really fascinating technologies that remove some of the challenges around social coordination that were historically served by religion, the state, and these centers of power. So, like this great flattening, this great democratization, this pushing of power to the edges, like the fact that someone in their bedroom can create, video or like a dude skateboarding and chugging ocean spray cranberry juice can like
Yeah.
make a video that goes viral and hundreds of millions of people watch it. I think that all speaks to the fact that like we are going through this really interesting restructuring of how we as humans collectively share information, collaborate, how thought is shaped. And what I keep coming back to is like in the last 2 decades in particular, I think we've sort of taken this hard shift away from feeling the intuitive, like maybe some of the creative intelligence that we have towards like science, fact. We only believe in math, like, and it's
Mm.
become very pedagogical. And I think like belief in science and math and econ, right, and models, like that is a tyranny all of its own. It's on
Yeah.
par with the tyranny of like Judeo-Christian religion, right? And so I think what's been really interesting to observe, like if we look at what happened in the presidential election, a number of states, right, decriminalized hallucinogens and psychedelics. A number of states decriminalized marijuana. Like the war on drugs is kind of ending. Meditation apps and other sort of holistic wellness apps are more popular than ever. I think one of the frontiers, along with all of the innovation happening in science, one of the big frontiers I'm really excited about is like, how do we reconnect science and math and like STEM with creative intelligence and like the natural state and our understanding of our own minds and how we work. Like that is also such a powerful force. And
Mm.
we've seen like social media has had the ability to manipulate that, but how do we help people reclaim sort of that domain? And I actually think crypto has done a great job at that because Bitcoin is not just pure math and pure science. There's a lot of philosophy
Yeah.
within Bitcoin that I think forces people to have a conversation with themselves. We call it the rabbit hole, but like it forces you to have a confrontation or a conversation with yourself about like, why do I believe what I believe? Why does the world look the way it does? And do I fundamentally believe that? And do I want to continue supporting that?
Yeah.
So it's like,
Do
it's
you,
very cool. That's very long winded, but I am very
no,
excited.
do you think like that sort of more so than more of the like, when portfolio allocators look at things, they try and look at things like various risk metrics. Do you think it's more so the philosophical discussion that it forces people to have that is sort of an inhibitor to large scale adoption? Do you feel like that's more of a, or because it focuses people if they, to really believe in Bitcoin and in blockchain in the future that it purports to have, that I believe it has, it really does make you question a lot of the things that we're doing today.
Yeah. Look, I think there are a number of factors here. First of all, if we look at who allocators are, I think whenever you're speaking to someone, it's very important to understand their worldview, right?
Mm.
Because that shapes their experience of reality. And that shapes what they like, what they don't like, their hopes, their fears. And a lot of my job really is just listening to people and trying to understand how they view the world and how that shapes their decision making. And then my job really is trying to explain what's happening with Bitcoin in a way that they can actually integrate into their mental model. Because I think a lot of times the crypto space, like you get on crypto Twitter or you go to a crypto event and you're like, these people are fucking insane. Like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is this?
Yeah.
Because it's so far removed from maybe your sort of concept of what makes sense, that you can't even process it, you can't even begin to engage with it.
Mhm.
um so I think the first step is like understanding, okay, what's the frame of reference? Like, how is this person viewing the world? How is this person viewing reality? And then from there, I think you can start to present that person with facts, right? You can start to qualify and quantify why maybe they should be interested in developing their own perspective on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And then from there, you can expose them to other people who maybe will resonate with them. If you have an allocator, who is working for a sovereign wealth fund that's where the board is, 50 white men over the age of 70, they're not going to respond respond well to certain
Yeah.
things. And again, I'm not criticizing anyone. I think a lot of people actually are extremely open-minded and are willing to change their minds, but I think it's just understanding the audience and what's going to resonate. And I think the challenge is, sometimes in crypto we operate in this bubble where the way we talk with one another, because we all share this collective belief and we've gone through this collective experience, it doesn't really translate well to bringing new people in. And then when they come in, inevitably, maybe they're attracted to parts of the industry that feel familiar to them. I
Mhm.
think there's this big trend of people coming from Wall Street over into crypto, and they're like, oh, it's so easy, I'm gonna be so
Yeah.
successful in crypto. And I'm
Yeah.
like, sure, Jan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not to
No,
use a very touchy.
no, I agree. And I think, well, I mean, see, my view is that ultimately, um, as someone who I used to work at Morgan Stanley in previous life, but I really think that blockchain can really, because I really think a lot of the business models that what traditional banks do today is just kind of pointless. There's no reason for them to be there. So I think it, can disintermediate, um, a lot of their business operations away. So I think, um, and I find when I talk to a bunch of my friends that work in the traditional finance space, they really can't wrap their head around. And that's actually really good advice. Maybe I should listen, because basically what I'm saying is, in my view, I think a lot of their businesses are essentially going to zero. And then you throw in, something like negative interest rate policy that doesn't help, of course. Um, so that's
But
very
by
good.
the way, they're not just under assault from crypto, right? There
Yeah.
was a great graphic, I believe, from The Economist a few weeks ago that showed how actually fintech overall had been eroding the market share of banks in specific segments. And then there's a great graphic CV Insights made about 5 years ago, I think, where they showed, I think it was the home screen of Wells Fargo. And then they had like logos of hundreds of startups that were basically attacking all of the different functions of the bank. Look, at the end of the day, I think the last 20 years of history and tech in particular, like I was a kid when the internet first emerged. I experienced the internet first through like IRC and then through AOL. And I was like, part of that generation of kids in the 90s who were on the internet playing video games like the PS1, Final
Yeah.
Fantasy, what up, best
There you
game
go.
franchise of all time. um, and so you have this whole generation where like in the 90s people were criticizing the internet, right? And I love Mary Meeker's Internet Trends Report reports. Last year I did a crypto trends report. We're doing it again this year. But the internet, a lot of people thought it had no place in their business. And now every business in the world uses the internet in some way, and the internet is a core part of their business model. And the most powerful companies in the world, the wealthiest companies in the world, the most influential companies in the world are all internet companies, right? They're companies that connect us to our friends, that connect us to information. Like Google owns 75% of search, Amazon owns 50% of cloud. 80% of US households have a Prime membership. Like the numbers are cuckoo. Facebook has 3 billion users on its platform. Like, wild. This stuff is
Mhm.
wild. I think the next iteration, what's going to define the next 20 years, which I think is really fascinating, is access to money and financial services. Like, we are going to see great democratization in finance. It's not just crypto, right? It's like across the board, banking as a service, fintechs, the ability to embed finance into a platform without needing all of these layers of intermediaries that you pay fees to, or a lot of fees to, and being able to internalize some of those finance functions, I think is going to be really transformative, because at the end of the day, commerce is innate to everything we do as humans. And
Mhm.
so embedding commerce into the experience itself, just in the way that we embedded the ability to communicate at scale into the experience itself with the supercomputers we have in our pocket, like, this is a logical next step. And so what I think's been interesting to observe, and like why I no longer work in finance, or I started in the oil and gas industry, right? Like,
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
an old industry. And we can get into energy, which I think is also a super fun topic. But talk about a shift, right? So all of these businesses had to adapt, had to adjust. So I don't think it's that financial services and banking is ever going to go away, because at the end of the day, this challenge of coordinating, of having specific expertise related to transactions, like, there are valuable functions that banks have. I think the question is, like, what is and is not valuable, and what actually necessitates or requires, a 3 to 5% fee. And the fact that, in the year 2020, I have to go to my bank with two forms of ID and ask for permission to spend my own money
Yeah, it's
is
wild.
fucking preposterous. Like, I
Yeah.
will say it's fucking preposterous.
Yeah.
It's
No,
wild.
it's we're talking about going to Mars and things like that, and yet we can't for some reason send money across the globe. It literally makes no sense. Um I guess, so I was someone always told me, one of my mentors told me to be short-term pessimistic but long-term optimist.
Mm,
And one thing that I am optimistic about is that I think that financial inclusion, as you had mentioned, is like been a serious roadblock to sort of our collective, to our collective benefit as human society and to further human society. And so I think what's great about blockchain is that it enables, because in the first world we take all these things like documentation and driver's license and which enable us to have access to credit and other types of things. But I think it allows people sitting outside the first world to finally get access to credit,
mm.
which I think has kind of been like sort of not a holy grail, but like a problem that people have been trying to solve forever. Do you think that way is through like CBDCs, or do you think it's through another way, or what do you think is the going to be the vehicle, their path?
Yeah. So I think the financial inclusion angle is one that gets talked about ad nauseum in crypto
Yeah.
without zero quantification or qualification of how crypto does that. So
Mm.
while I do believe that cryptocurrencies have a fundamental role to play in changing the power of institutions, I think that's the bit of like a it's become a platitude at this point. I'm like, I'm sorry, can you just
Yeah.
quantify and qualify what you
Yeah.
mean when you say financial inclusion? Here's what I think is going to change, right? At the end of the day, I think people have the misguided belief that financial institutions are here to serve all customers, and they're not. They're businesses, right? And there is a large segment of the population, even in the United States, 30% of the population is unbanked or underbanked. Why? Because it is not profitable to serve this customer base with the existing business model that a financial services institution has. It is not profitable in many instances to service certain groups of customers or certain types of customers around the world because of the business models that institutions have. But also, like, there are complex politics and policies that have to do with suppressing certain populations. Like, politics are about power. Power is about controlling who has the right to do what. And there's an intractable relationship between technology and power, right? People who create technology are creating power. Now, the way that power is being expressed varies by who is wielding that power. And we've seen that, right? Like, let's talk about privacy. Let's talk about the ability for people to communicate, right? the internet was supposed to be a great equalizer. It was supposed to democratize, and the internet is not a democratic place. It's a dictatorship,
Yeah.
right? If Facebook decides that I'm a persona non grata, I lose my ability to use that platform. If PayPal decides I'm a persona non grata, they deny me the ability to use their network. If the Bitcoin blockchain decides I'm a persona non grata, ain't shit it can do, right? So this is
Yeah.
like a very different model. I think the other core piece that so really sorry what it's about, I think, is the lack of ability for people to censor. Service providers can censor, right? Coinbase can say, I'm not going to serve Iranian customers because it's a violation of these OFAC policies. But the Bitcoin network itself cannot censor people from using it. And I think that really is the powerful thing with peer-to-peer open source technologies. Like, nobody can be stopped from using the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network cannot deny service to anyone based on the facts and circumstances of who they are and how the people in power perceive them, right? If I have the fortune of, or misfortune perhaps, of being born in a regime or in a part of the world that is perceived to be a threat to the United States, I have no access to, the
Yeah.
internet. I can't access GitHub now, right? Like, I can't contribute to projects on GitHub. I can't access financial services. There are a bunch of things I can't access just because I was born in a specific place or my IP address is registered in a specific place. And I think that model of defining what people can and can't do based on the physical jurisdiction within which they reside it doesn't make sense in the age of the internet, right? Like, on
Yeah.
the internet, anyone could be a dog. So that to me is exciting. The ability to have pseudonymous identities, the ability to have pseudonymous financial identities is really powerful. Where now, instead of me as a person, me as Meltem opening an account at a financial services institution, I, as a public wallet address, right, can engage different service providers to service my specific wallet address. But I can change service providers, right? Changing service providers in crypto is super easy. I do it all the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
And in the world of Bitcoin, super easy. In the world of Ethereum, even easier. And the great thing is, like, in typical consumer banking, only about 4% of deposits migrate on an annual basis. So consumer deposits and even institutional deposits are super sticky because moving your money is really, really hard. And there's very little differentiation among what services banks provide. And actually, if the government decides you're persona non grata, you can't even access your bank account. So that's
Yeah.
super fun, right?
Yeah.
And then the burden of proof is on you to restore access to your own assets. It's bananas, right? This
Yeah.
is about power and control at the end of the day. And what crypto does is it inverts the power relationship because you have control of your assets. If you have your keys, you are in control of your assets and you get to choose what service providers you use, and you can easily migrate service providers because, again, I'm not beholden to JP Morgan Chase. I'm not beholden to PayPal or Visa or MasterCard. I'm beholden only to the Bitcoin network. And now we're building bridges between blockchain networks as well, right? By wrapping assets and creating bridges. And so pretty soon, it'll be questionable as to whether I'm even beholden to a specific network. Right now, a lot of the wrapping is done in a centralized manner. So those bridges are like pegged by centralized service provider, but there are a lot of experiments, right, to decentralize that so you can migrate your assets between networks. That's crazy because at the end of the day, what we're doing here is we're separating money and state, right? So we're changing the relationship. And this power dynamic, what I think is so fascinating is, like, people don't understand how profoundly transformative that is, but also how profoundly threatening that is to the current world order. And what's great is, like, we've now gotten to this point where it's too big to stop.
Yeah.
I just think it's amazing. I love it.
No, so I guess following that thread a little bit, what does that force, in the long term, assuming mass adoption, what does that force like corporations in terms
Hold
of
on. What do you mean by mass adoption?
like in terms of when I can switch service providers easily without friction? Like, if you want to cancel your New York Times subscription, it's a pain in the ass. Like, they call you like 6 times and have you ever tried to do that?
Yeah, I did that recently.
Yeah,
It took
did they
6
reroute
emails.
you? Yeah, they reroute you to someone else, and so that's just an example, but being able to switch service providers whenever I want, there's less friction there. Being able to move my money, being able to cancel a subscription, whatever it may be, but that sort of forces sort of companies or products, organizations offering products, to sort of have a different value prop or sort of differentiate themselves more. I don't know, like how does that affect sort of their offering and the way they convey those offerings? Because how do they make those customers sticky? It's a different paradigm all of a sudden.
Yeah. And this is actually where we get into a topic I'm really excited about, which is community, right? And the power of community. And community, I think, like that word is so overused, right? People are like, "Oh, you're part of the Facebook community." Like, no, you are not part of the Facebook
Yeah.
community. Like, you are addicted to a product. You are not part of the community. Um, what I think is interesting here, what I think has been so interesting to observe about cryptocurrency, and again, this is getting a little bit more into sort of the philosophical, is each community in crypto has a very specific vibe, like if I can call it that vibe, right? They
Mhm.
have an ethos, they style themselves in particular way, they use specific language. I actually think what's really interesting about what's been happening in the crypto space, right? Like Bitcoin maximalism is an example, right? People use that as a moniker to identify a certain community of people who have a certain set of beliefs. And I think we live in this really cool post religion, post nationalism era where when you're a citizen of the internet, you can belong to multiple communities, either directly by using your default world identity or by using pseudonymous identity. I love Twitter eggs for this reason, right? Like these Anon accounts will have hundreds of thousands of followers. Like Plan B is a great example where like Twitter egg is writing the investment thesis for Bitcoin. I think that's beautiful. So I think in this world where we're citizens of the internet, having the ability to belong to all of these communities that are not defined by national borders, that are not defined by the language you speak, your skin color, where you were born, what passport you hold. Like none of these things define you or what communities you belong to on the internet. You get to choose.
Mhm.
And how do people choose? Well, people choose based on their values, people choose based on the outcome they want to see for the world, right? Whether it's pessimism that's inspiring that, as I think a lot of people in Bitcoin, are short term inspired by pessimism. They're like, wow, like dollar sinking ship, right? Current
Mhm.
socioeconomic system. No, future potentially brighter over here. And so, what I think is so interesting is you have the emergence of a new type of mythology, right? And here I'm going to go back to kind of where we started. Mythology was a way that people explained the universe and their relationship to it, right? And mythology has persisted. Like storytelling continues to be, in my view, the greatest sort of craft in the world, right? I think a lot of Trump's success in the US, by the way, is related to the fact that he's actually a very good storyteller and he creates mythology about himself that's really powerful because people respond to mythology. And so, what I'm really excited about is like we're entering this phase where these different communities with these different mythologies, right? And we explain different things and we attribute them to these different forces. And so, as these different crypto mythologies sort of evolve, they start to mesh with other mythologies that are out there on the internet. Like the internet is such a wonderful and weird and wacky place, and I love
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, no.
Scary to some people, but like I love it. I think it's great. And so the ability to form these communities and then to create monetary value within these communities and then to actually be able to like share that value and exchange that value for other types of value is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And that's how money started, right? Like the relationship between money and state started when Julius Caesar stamped his face on a gold coin, right? This was when the Roman Empire was massive, right? And extended beyond borders. It was a great way for communities, right? For him to create a mythology around himself as the all supreme ruler of all of these disparate communities that were meshed together into one by a common law and then a common form of money, which was a gold coin with his face on it. And so, anyways, I'm getting very long-winded, but I'm very, 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 very big believer in the power of communities, the power of collective action, and the power of belief. I think what we believe, what we say, the stories we tell ourselves, this is what we become. And so I think the mythology and the narrative is such an important part of what we're doing here. And then, so when you said mass adoption, the reason I
Mhm.
react to that, I think for a lot of people, mass adoption means the price of Bitcoin goes up,
Oh, no, that's not the way I look at it, yeah. That's
or it
actually for
means
me yeah. For
or
me,
it
that's a
means
bit
like
sorry, go
Morgan
ahead.
Stanley like starts doing stuff with Bitcoin. Like I
Oh,
do
I
not
see.
care if Morgan Stanley does anything. I don't care if JP Morgan starts custodying it. Like I literally could care less. It drives one part of the narrative, but it drives a part of the narrative that I think is already dead and dying. We need to make a new narrative. And so I think it's incumbent on us to sort of chart the path for how we will evolve into new types of financial institutions. Like this is what we're trying to do at CoinShares, albeit, we're doing it in this regulated sort of box, but we're trying to migrate and sort of chart a course over the next 25 years as to how we'll go from being a financial services company in today's construct into how will be financial services companies in this construct of the future. There are other firms that are doing it in, more innovative ways because they're in places where regulation is perhaps different, or they're operating in with a business model that's distributed, or they have governance within a DAO. Like there are different ways of doing it, but what we're doing right now is creating a new mythology, a new type of business model. It will take 10, 15, 20, 25 years, but at the end of the day, like I am not here for getting institutions into Bitcoin. I am here for getting Bitcoin to change the way that institutions function. Because
Yeah,
path A doesn't fundamentally change anything. Path
agree.
B starts to change things, right? So I think sometimes people will say words, but not
Yeah, no, it's a good
process.
distinction. Um, and I guess for us, the price appreciation or the daily fluctuations in the price is really we don't really care about. We're more interested in people using it. People, I'm super interested in trying to find people using it not for like DeFi, but to play games or things like that, where it's not because all the focus is on finance related. But that's
Yeah,
what
but
I guess that's what I
okay,
mean
but
by
that's actually really cool because I think finance is the world's biggest MMORPG, right? Like as someone who grew up playing RPGs pre like mass internet, I
Mhm.
I love RPGs, role playing games.
Yeah,
So like cuz it's you're in a narrative, you're in a like you get dropped into this alternate reality with its own characters, its own rules, its own values, and then you're like in this universe. And a lot of the early online communities I was a part of were like game based online communities, right? We're a group of people who lived in this alternate universe and we're trying to breed golden chocobos. So like get the special spells so you can beat the end boss. Wow, I'm a super loser.
no, I mean, I grew up in a household without TV, so I was playing Myst, if you remember that. It's like the one. I don't know if you ever
Yeah,
played Myst. It
Mist
was
was
awesome.
epic. I mean, I
Yeah,
remember LAN parties, like, wow.
yeah,
Drinking Surge in my parents' basement, having LAN parties, being like, "This is fire."
yeah,
And so it's no surprise I work in crypto.
yeah. No,
I'm
no.
like,
So
"This
it's
is
so that,
dope."
yeah. So yeah, it's just fascinating, and I'm really excited about. Um, I guess I get really excited when I hear, applications being built and people using these things for those types of things. Just
But
because,
finance is also a massive game, right?
yeah,
Like finance like in a way it is the game, right? And so in a way what Bitcoin has done is it's created this really interesting game. We believe that what we're playing for maybe is inconsequential, but we're playing for a very big prize. And I think sometimes I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I underestimate how powerful the idea of Bitcoin is. There are billions of people around the world who are learning about Bitcoin, who are looking at it and they're like, wait. Yeah, I remember, I'll tell you a story. I've been telling this story a lot lately because it feels very relevant right now. In 2018, I was at a conference for central bankers in Vienna, and it was all the European central bankers, and we had this dinner with Western Union because CEO of Western Union's like, all about trying to figure out like how do we evolve our business model to fit in this new world, right? To do what we do. And that's a challenge, but also I think super cool. So I have this dinner, and it was just intended to get people together, but also to talk to these people about, what do you think about Bitcoin? What do you think about cryptocurrency? Just really facilitating some osmosis through information share. And I remember I was talking to a central banker, and he was like, "Well, you can't have your own currency." I was like, "Well, what? Why not?" He was like, "Well, you don't have an army." I was like, "Excuse me, I have an army. It's called crypto Twitter."
Yeah.
Right? So I think we sometimes underestimate, and like this is what I think is driving so much of the narrative right now with institutions and corporations, right? Talking about Bitcoin, it makes their stock price go up. Like Bitcoin is a huge channel to market to. We have a super active, super passionate community of people who are really active online, who create shitloads of free content, right? Like literally, there is so much content out there available for free. People will market your business for free. So marketing to the Bitcoin audience is a massive, massive advantage for business because you're able to tap into a narrative that is fueled by like this rabid online community. And so I actually think our greatest strength again is like this huge community of people who are super active and like they do shape policy. They do shape how people think. Like we are more powerful than we believe we are. And I think that's also great. And again, it's something I don't appreciate until I kind of sit back and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what? What? Like, people
Yeah.
listen to us, people read what we say, and they think it's interesting. Like, don't sell. We can't sell ourselves short because we do have an impact, and I think the voices and the community is really important. And it's craziness, right? That's kind of part of the appeal. It's like, look at these nut jobs.
No, I'm almost amazed on a daily basis about just the sheer amount of like people writing free content, but how just well written it is, how
Yeah,
intelligent it is, how unique it is.
yeah.
And I'm just continuously amazed that all these people are in the community. I'm like, wow, it's like fascinating. And like you learn so much every day, and it's really I've been fortunate that I'm able to participate to some degree. So it's great to see. Um, it's interesting because if you start marketing to, you know, to the crypto world, it actually makes your business in a way a little bit more sticky, I guess, because you're joining a community, which is interesting because it's like a not a reverse merger, but it's like you're doing the reverse of what a
Also,
more traditional. Sorry.
no, but like, look at this. Okay, let's talk at the end. Like, let's just use an example, right? Again, to just quantify and qualify what I'm talking about. Let's look at Square and let's look at PayPal. Okay, two very different companies. PayPal has 10 times the users of Square. Their Venmo product has about 346 million users, I think, and Square's Cash App product has 30 million users. And by the way, that's up 3x from 2 years ago when they first added crypto, right? So you have a company that has a product and an audience that is much larger than another company's. Square announced support for Bitcoin in late 2018. Since then, every single quarter, the amount of Bitcoin bought on their app goes up by double digit percentages, or sometimes even doubles or triples. Bitcoin buying is now contributing on a quarterly basis a couple of $1 million to the bottom line, or roughly 2 to 3% to their profit margin. Square's stock price, and again, I'm not attributing this to crypto alone, but I just want to drop some facts so we can just use data to kind of like try to infer cause and effect. Square's stock price since the lows of March has tripled. People talk about Square all the time, right? Square's mentions are off the charts. People in the crypto community talk about Square all the time. Square is getting a shitload of free earned media because they're one of the biggest fintechs to engage with crypto, right? And they're super active on social media. They actively pander to the crypto community. The Square crypto handle is like, it's fire, right? Whoever runs that handle, they get it, they grok it. So here's Square, right? Stock price up, shareholders happy, growing like crazy. Over here is PayPal, 10 times larger user base, processing far more in transaction volume. Stock price has underperformed compared to Square. Stock price is only up 92% since their low in March. So they're like while they're performing, absolutely speaking, relatively speaking, they're drastically underperforming, right? And so they're now looking at the world and they're like, okay, Square's doing crypto, Robinhood's doing crypto, Revolut's doing crypto, SoFi's doing crypto. They are literally the only fintech right now that isn't doing anything with crypto. So I don't think their move into crypto is like revolutionary. I think it's 2 years too late. And I also think if you're sitting on a board and you're looking at your competitor who is 1/10 your size, who's puny, right? Just getting all of this free attention just because they do this dumb Bitcoin thing, you're going to be like, can we please get on this train? Like, it
Yeah.
costs us literally nothing to write a press release about crypto. It costs us comparatively very little to add crypto to an existing product in a fully custodial way. Like, what are we doing? So again, like, I think if you think about how companies function, if you think about the mental calculus here, it's a no-brainer to me. I am frankly shocked that it's taken PayPal this long. I'm
Well,
happy they're
it's
here, but it's just like shocking and it's sad, frankly.
yeah, no, it's well, I guess it goes to the nature about how, generally speaking, and I've been guilty of this, is that people are just wed to their ideas or concept of reality. That it's hard for a lot of people to sort of step back and make these decisions that seemingly seem like the most important thing or like a monumental thing. Where, like in the case of PayPal, it's not that big of a deal, but I guess maybe and I'm inferring this, I have no way of knowing, but maybe they view it as a much bigger decision than it actually is.
Yeah,
So
but look, at the end of the day, I think PayPal's not moving fast enough. And then you can't forget, right? When we look at PayPal and we look at Square and we think that's cool. I read this statistic a few days ago, and I think it's well researched. It was shared by a gentleman named Chris Skinner, who's like very knowledgeable on banking and fintech generally, but I have not confirmed this data myself. But he dropped this really interesting fact. Ant Financial, right, which is about to IPO, biggest IPO ever. It's going to be insane. PayPal in 2019 processed 700 billion in transactions. Cool, cool, cool. How much do you think Ant Financial processed in transactions?
PayPal is at 700
Billion.
billion. I mean, based on what like my cursory reading on the media, and based on people saying how big it is, I would say double. No,
Double. So that's 1.4 trillion.
yeah,
Try more than 20x, 17 trillion.
wow.
Ant Financial processed 17 trillion of transactions in 2019.
Wow.
That's in China, right? So this is a company focused purely on China. We haven't even talked about India yet. India, as a subcontinent and as country, has a population that is as large as North America, South America, and Western Europe combined.
Yeah.
1.3 billion people.
Yeah. I was reading a stat on how, like, I think 1 in 3 young people, or is it 1 in 6? I got to go back and look, are going to be Indian entering the workforce, which is wild. If you just took a room, anyway, it's just a wild. Yeah, it's why it's people don't realize how big those countries are. Massive.
Yeah, but it's not just how big those countries are. They are not mired in the same like weird ideology that we are. And again, there's a lot of structural differences. Like, I'm not saying one is better or worse. I'm just providing these numbers as an example, and a data point to indicate like we're sitting over here in our own little bubble, like faffing about how amazing PayPal getting into crypto is. There's a way bigger opportunity out there, huge opportunity out there. It's massive already. It's going to be even more massive, right? According to a lot of estimates, the size of the Chinese economy in the next 10 years will be double that of the US economy. Like, we are trapped in this way of thinking that the US is the center of the universe. Like, reality check, it is not. I'm from Turkey. I grew up in Europe. Like, I do not understand this obsession in America with like all things American. People have long believed the center of innovation is America, and I think that is no longer the case. Like SOSV, right? You're investing all over the world.
Mhm.
CoinShares, we're a company that is based in Europe, and I run our New York office, but we're investing globally. Like 50% of our investments are outside of the US for a reason. We're investing in Southeast Asia, we're investing in the Middle East, we're investing in India. Why? Because these markets are tremendously important. And the size, just the sheer size of these markets, it's mind boggling. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, it's weird how, I started even sometimes when I use like the 24-hour clock with my friends sometimes because I have a habit of doing that. And they're like, dude, you use time the real way. I'm like, well, the 12-hour clock is really, a lot of people in the US use the 12-hour clock. Like that's a very like world revolves around the US like kind of way of thinking, I think.
Yeah, but
But
also I was laughing about this with a friend, like the imperial system makes no sense. Like
yeah,
in Europe, like everything is base 10. It's great. It makes
yeah,
math really understandable. And then you come to America, it's like here are 10,000 random numbers for you to memorize. I still to this day cannot tell you how many feet are in a mile because it makes no goddamn sense, right? It's like
yeah,
5,380. Like what? What is that number? You can't
yeah.
convert miles into feet. Then there's yard. Like what? Can we just stop with this colonialist view of the world
Yeah.
and do the thing that makes sense, which is using base 10 numbers?
Yeah.
Anyways,
All right.
sidebar.
No, no, no. Of course, I'm gonna see what kind of questions people have dumped in here. Give me a moment. Here's a question: how can we prevent the future crypto from ending up like the internet today, theoretically decentralized, but where 99% of the population exists within these walled gardens,
Hmm.
where there are persona non grata scenarios you mentioned with Facebook, where the oh sorry, I'm reading this. Sorry. Would it still be possible to have the persona non grata scenario you mentioned with Facebook?
Uh, so look, the network itself, right? The protocol itself, it is not prone to censorship. Service providers on the network can censor transactions. We haven't talked at all about mining or infrastructure, like that whole side of crypto, which I think is really interesting. Like the internet doesn't exist like in the ether, right? There is electrons and silicon and copper wires that are needed for the internet to function. And all of that is like a massive, massive, massive part of the internet economy that I don't think we appreciate or understand. Then there's routing logic, right? Which dictates how information flows, how data flows, what it touches before it gets to its final location, how that web traffic is sniffed. And then there's the actual end delivery. We only interact with one part of the value chain, but there's this like entire value chain in the internet and how we consume stuff on our phones, but that also exists in crypto, right? There's an entire value chain that's very asset heavy and capex heavy that I think a lot of people don't think about. So what I think is really cool about Bitcoin is Bitcoin at its core is a communication network, right? It's kind of like the internet, except instead of communicating information and data, et cetera, it communicates value. But it does this in the same way. It's zeros and ones, right? So I think the censorship part is a lot harder. It's really dependent on the service providers that people use. And again, I think what we're seeing around the world is an attack on privacy, like just across the board, an attack on end-to-end encryption because regulators are starting to realize that privacy threatens their supremacy. There's sort of this unitary theory of government that I think you're seeing in the US with like these like 80-year-old, Republican senators who are trying to pass laws to re-implement things like the Clipper chip, but in new form, like these back doors for lawful intercept. If you're curious about that, I've written a lot about this topic. It's on my Medium page and on the CoinShares Medium page. I'm very passionate about privacy and privacy rights. But I think it's going to start with an attack on encryption generally, end-to-end encryption. And it's also going to start with financial privacy laws, right? Like already the travel rule is trying to implement more stringent requirements on capturing data about who's doing what. The IRS has lots of data on who holds cryptocurrencies, who's trading cryptocurrencies, et cetera. So I think the threat vectors and the attack vectors are through these centralized institutions. And they're also, even decentralized projects are not immune to this, right? Like if you are a known person with a name and an address and a tax ID, like you are a vector for attack. And so what I think's really cool to see, the brilliance of Bitcoin, no leaders, no representatives. Satoshi is a collective myth, it's a mythology. Satoshi left enough of the mythology behind that we've created our own stories around Satoshi, whoever she, he, they are, right? And so what I think will be really interesting to see is like the rise of more and more protocols, projects in the space that are fully anonymous, that are distributed, right? Not decentralized, but really distributed, and don't present one single point of attack. At the end of the day, Bitcoin's biggest strength is the inability for the world's powerful forces, i.e., governments, to agree on what the heck to do with it. And so I think that will be the greatest strength of crypto going forward, is if we can leverage this fact that crypto is distributed and that there are so many different points you would need to attack to do coordinated sort of takedown of Bitcoin. So I think continuing to sort of keep this distributed mindset in mind is important. The other thing I really think is important is education and ensuring that people are not putting all of their Bitcoin in, third-party custody. Not your keys, not your coin. I think it's a really important part of the Bitcoin philosophy. It doesn't mean you should put all your Bitcoin in a multi-sig non-custodial wallet, but I think people should diversify. I personally use Casa, which I'm an investor in, to manage a large part of my Bitcoin holdings. It's a multi-sig non-custodial solution, and I try not to keep a lot of Bitcoin on exchanges or in centralized custody. But I think that is an important sort of part of the indoctrination into Bitcoin, is continuing to sort of pound the table on this not your keys, not your coins message, and making sure that, not all of the Bitcoin in the world is going to end up in the paws of, BNY Mellon, who then gives us paper receipts and says like, hey, here's an IOU
Yeah.
for your Bitcoin, but like,
Yeah.
you're never getting it back.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
No. So, I guess I think would be a short answer, but what's the best Final Fantasy?
Oh, Final Fantasy VII. Duh.
Okay.
Duh. Cloud forever. Cloud was like my first crush, and he's a cartoon character from a game. pretty vibing.
So we are out of time, and I'm actually kind of sad that we are, because I feel like we could keep talking for a really long time. But the last question that I have is, how can we be helpful, as a community, for those that are, as part of the SOSV community, but also our founders, and for those listening that are outside of that community, how can we be helpful?
I think SOSV has done a great job investing in a lot of very different types of companies in the space. I think the biggest thing any of us can do is really, take responsibility for our actions, our messages, and the role we're playing in sort of building the future. Again, I think, the most powerful thing in the world is the stories we tell ourselves about what is and isn't impossible, what can and can't be done. I am victim to this every day, right? And I'm constantly battling with my own psychology and all of this stuff we've been programmed to believe, that is then reinforced by all of the stuff we're seeing. Create your own mythology, continue really pushing yourself to confront the fallacies in your own mental models, in your own thinking, and continue to seek understanding. And how do you bring together your understanding of science and the laws of the universe, right, and these irrefutable truths, and how do you bring that together with some of the more metaphysical and some of the more intuitive sort of creative intelligence that you have, to challenge some of these constructs. The most important thing we can do is to continue pushing ourselves, to continue asking questions, and to continue building things that defy conventional wisdom.
Yeah, certainly will do.
It's fun.
Yeah,
that's the fun of life.
Yeah, no, it's a blast. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure speaking.
Hold on. What's the price of Bitcoin right now, Paul? We said we weren't going to talk about price, but
But I honestly haven't checked since 2 days ago, so I don't really know. 15,000, 15,500.
What's your bet right now?
Right now.
Yeah, what is it?
I'm going to go 15,327.
Oh, close. 15,160. All right.
Oh, wow. All right. Have a good one. Thank you very much.